Welcome, everyone. It's an honor for me to be hosting the third panel of the third GEN Ecovillage Summit. This year, the theme of this summit is Living Solutions for a Regenerative World. And to participate with us today, we have Ted Rau, Natalia Greene Dean Walker, and Anna Kovasna. So I'm going to start by just doing a round of introduction. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to be calling one by one, so you will have the chance to introduce yourself as well. So I'm a former trustee and current GEN ambassador in Brazil. I'm also the operational leader of Casa Latina, which is the Council of Sustainable Settlements of Latin America. I'm the facilitator of the Latin American Hub for the Global Alliance of the Rights of Nature. I'm also the delegate of the Permaculture Circle of the Sociocracy for All, and currently the most voted councillor in the history of the city of Alto Paraíso de Goiás, with the mission of bringing and bridging the Ecovillage movement with the rights of nature, sociocracy, and permaculture into Brazilian politics. So now I'm going to call Nati to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Henny, for giving me the floor. I'm really excited to be here with you guys today. My name is Natalia Greene. I'm from Ecuador. I participated in the introduction of the rights of nature in our constitution back in 2008. And since then, I fell in love with the topic, and I've been working on it all my time. So in 2010, I co-founded the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature after we met in Bolivia with a nice group of people that we realized that it wasn't only us here in Ecuador that were crazy thinking about rights of nature, but there were more crazy people around the world thinking about it. So we hosted an event to launch the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature in 2010. And I've been working with the Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature since then. I am also here in Ecuador, the vice president. I was formerly the president, now I'm the vice president of SEDENMA, that is the coordinating entity for environmental NGOs in Ecuador. And I'm very happy to say that I've been working with the rights of nature and with amazing projects like the Yasuni ITT initiative to live the oil underground, and working with indigenous people here in Ecuador and with the rights of nature. So that's my passion and my work. And now really happy to be working with Henny, with the Latin American Hub, and many other amazing projects.
Thank you, Nati, and many more. Huh? Ted, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Henny. So my name is Ted Rau. I am in Massachusetts in the USA, and I am one of the co-founders of Sociocracy for All, which is a nonprofit that helps people get connected and sociocracy out in the world. And I'm the operational leader there. Also hold a few roles like the external contact, which is, I guess, why I'm here, and leader of content circles. So a lot of what I do is training and content production there. Then also I live in an intentional community here in Massachusetts with, I think, 70, 80 neighbors, my 5 kids. And let's see. Oh, one thing I always say, or 2 things, is few things that inform my perspective, I guess, is I moved from Germany to the US. So I live in the US, but I consider myself from here at all. And I'm transgender, so I just transitioned 3 years ago or so. So that's me. Check.
Thank you, Ted. Dean?
I'm Dean Walker. I live in Southern Oregon in the States, and I've been a part of the deep adaptation community really since it started, with Jem Bendel forming a number of different organizations, one of which was called the Deep Adaptation Forum. So I've been a volunteer moderator since that started. And then I also have become a deep adaptation advocate. So there were so many invitations for Jem to speak that there was just no way he could keep up with that pace. So he invited a handful of us to speak in place of him in a number of different conferences. Do you remember not too long ago, people actually got together in person? I I'd forgotten about that. But anyway, we did a few of those, and then everything went to Zoom. And prior to that, I've been mostly in the transformation-based training world. And that means bringing a particularly potent kind of curriculum to a number of different kinds of training. That includes community development, which really mostly was training adults to work with very challenged teens in their community. And that was both in the UK and the USA. And then a lot of that transformation-based work in the corporate world. And really all of that has shifted since my own awareness of the level of challenge and predicament that we're facing. I shifted all of my work and all of my attention to bringing that same quality of powerful curriculum to organizations and movements, the likes of which we're going to be talking about today, because there's just nothing more important. It's it's extraordinarily hollow at this point to try and work with organizations like corporations. I'll leave that for someone with more of a liking of that. I've had plenty, and now there's nothing I'd rather be doing than bringing the strongest tools I know of to organizations that are trying to build something new.
Thanks, Dean. Anna, please introduce yourself to us.
Thank you, Henny. My name is Anna Kovasna. I'm from Sweden originally, but I've lived in the Finnhorn Ecovillage in the north of Scotland for the past 10 years, and talking to you from France today, where I'm spending COVID time. I'm currently the Education and Research Director of GEN International, and I also serve as what we in our collaborative governance system call our coordination circle lead link, so kind of operations lead. And I've been active in GEN at many levels, like from living in an eco-village to starting a national network to facilitating like meetings of national networks to my work now in GEN International. And I came to GEN from being an anthropologist, doing research about regenerative living, but in indigenous settings. So I worked primarily in the Amazon. And then when I found the Ecovillage movement, I made the decision to come home, like back to Europe where I'm from, and try to work on resolving all the issues that I saw, which kind of stem from a system where we are winning and where we're gaining from it, but destroying everybody else. So that's kind of how I came into it, although my heart is still really out there in the world with a lot of other people's.
Thank you, Anna. We are all here together today to be talking about movement building, to be able to understand how we can create a network made out of networks. And we understand by our talks, especially when Dean mentioned that not so long ago we were gathering personally with each other, but we are now living in a time of what we call a VUCA time. We live in a volatile world where changes are constant and very unpredictable. We also live in a very uncertain world where anticipating events is almost impossible, it's practically impossible. We live in this very complex world where it's increasingly difficult to understand how things are related to each other. And we live in this ambiguous world where not everything is black or white. So this word is called VUCA. It's known by VUCA, this volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. But like we are here today to exchange volatility for vision. What would happen if we exchange a volatility for vision, this uncertainty road for an understanding one, a complexity world for some more clarity, and ambiguity for adaptability? So here today we gather some movements and we're going to be talking about them and understand the interrelation between them and what are the connections behind it all. So I'm going to start by calling Nati to explain us what's the rights of nature movement.
Thank you, Henny, and lovely to hear everybody's introduction. Well, the rights of nature movement, what I feel it's pretty much nature talking through us. I think it's definitely the time where we need to be listening to nature, and we understand that rights in general are and law in general is definitely something that is volatile and changing all the time. So as women, like we of course needed to have rights and civil rights, and the rights, the feminist movement drove that into legislation when it was unacceptable that women didn't have rights. The same thing happened with indigenous people when they thought about the idea of collective rights. And the same thing happened with the abolitionist movement when they said, this is absurd, we cannot be treating Afro-American people like objects. And we need to make this transition and get rid of slavery. What we're doing with the rights of nature movement is pretty much liberating nature, because nature right now in the rest of the world is considered an object, the same way that African American people were considered objects in the US, for example. And that is very clear when you look at legislation, environmental legislation, that tells you how much you can pollute a river. It's telling you how much you can hit your slave. It's not telling you to liberate that slave or to stop polluting that slave. It's telling you how much you can control and pollute that object. So the rights of nature movement comes in a very important time where we are living in a very deep ecological crisis in the midst of climate change, even more now in the middle of a pandemic that is generated with a zoonotic origin, with an origin of the destruction of the forest, with a amplification of cities, with deforestation. And it comes in a moment that nature is speaking and saying, of course I have rights. I am a subject of rights. I'm you. We are nature. And if you guys have not been able to understand that until now, then I'm putting all of these hazards in front of you, and you need to figure out and realize that it's time for a change. So I think the rights of nature movement started a while ago, not only with what we have been doing with Garn 10 years ago, but with many people who have started writing and questioning why we're treating nature as an object. If nature is part of us, if we are nature, we are 70% water, like the planet is 70% water. Why are we considering nature as a resource? So the rights of nature started to build and to bring legislation to recognize that that object is a subject of rights, and we need to treat it differently into law. Why? Because when you start thinking of when you do changes in law, you start changing the society, and you start changing how society thinks about it. So of course we have not been able to get rid of racism, unfortunately, but it's illegal now, and more people think that that's absurd and we need to get rid of racism. So that's the way of how law changes the system. So when it's introduced into law, here in Ecuador, for example, we have 10 years of rights of nature, and we have a whole society of especially young people who don't even question that nature has rights or not. Nature has rights, and we need to incorporate this new way of dealing with nature. So the whole movement, and is moving in many different directions, and I will talk more about it, but it's pretty much coming out of the earth in many ways. So in Ecuador, we were able to put it up in our constitution, but in New Zealand, they were able to recognize the rights of the Wanganui River. And in the US, they were able to introduce it in local ordinances, and it's just pumping out whatever and however it can come through us as civil society that are the mediums of nature in this very special moment where we need this important transformation to recognize that nature is a subject of rights.
Thank you, Nati. You're such an inspiration for me. Like now that I am actually into politics, we are just like writing on a project of law here to recognize the rights of the river São Bartolomeu. So it's like a starting of these seeds that it's being planted here in Alto Paraíso de Goiás. I'm gonna call now Ana to talk to us and explain a little bit what is the Global Ecovillage Network.
Great, thanks, Henny. So the Global Ecovillage Network is it's a community, I guess, and a network of around 6,000 communities and ecovillages around the world. We're really diverse. So like from indigenous communities to traditional networks of villages in like India and Senegal to intentional communities in the global north. And what connects us is a holistic perspective. So we're really passionate about weaving together like social, ecological, economic, and cultural aspects of regeneration, and like understanding how they can strengthen each other and link as we kind of redesign systems. And we're also super committed to like radical democracy and grassroots action. So you'll never find an eco-village within GEN that's not kind of led and designed by the people who live there. So real belief in kind of people on the ground taking power over the future that they want to see and dedicating their lives to making that come through. And that's what I've loved about the Ecovillage movement. Like what I fell in love with was people's willingness to put their entire lives like on the line or at stake, or kind of completely change them in order to live a different world, like right in this one that we have. So kind of creating little autonomous zones or bubbles where reality can function in a different way, like where we can realize that we can be more than what the current system tells us that we can be. We can identify differently, we can exchange differently with our, like within, you know, the human world, but also with the rest of nature. So I really love that. And in the network as such, we come together on many levels. So GEN is a meta network. We have, you know, national networks in some parts of the world. We have regional networks and bioregional networks. We have our kind of continent-based networks. So like Henny is from Casa Latina, our Latin American one. Keala is from, who called this panel together. He is from GENA, our North American one. I'm in Europe, in GEN Europe. We have GEN Africa and Genoa, which is Oceania and Asia. And then we're all linked together in GEN International, which is where I work, trying to give ecovillages a kind of global voice, to facilitate more and more exchange between us so that we can learn from each other, and to simply support more and more people to switch into, I guess, our dream of a self-realized, grassroots empowered way of living in more harmony.
Thank you, Anna. Your introduction to the Global Ecovillage Network inspired me to call Ted now, because one thing that you said, you know, to give Ecovillage voices, Ted just wrote a book with Jerry called Many Voices, One Song. So what are these voices distributed into this sociocracy governance model? What is that all about, Ted?
Okay, the super brief summary of sociocracy for those who don't know. It's a way to decide who decides what. Basically, how do we spread out who decides what in an organization, and then how do we decide, right? The default consent decision-making method in sociocracy is consent. So that's a word that keeps coming up for people, right? Outside of governance also. So giving people the right to decide where their boundaries are and what they want to make happen together. And I think of sociocracy as, at least in the structure, something that is, it's attempting to represent interdependence between groups. So that's within an organization, right? Like people who form a team, who then are a team of teams, and then we have an organization. And then it's interesting to think about organizations of organizations, and then going to movements, right? Going to what we're talking about here. Sociocracy is used a lot in communities, intentional communities, and it's really interesting. I've been, you know, around the sociocracy thing for a number of years now, and in the beginning when I started, it was really mainly communities that knew it, and then some fancy sort of consulting kind of businesses that were into this kind of organizing. And it's really changed a lot. Like I remember there was like one particular marker a few years ago where like I was at a conference and I was telling people I do sociocracy, and they were like, what's that? I never heard of it, you know? And just 2 years later, it was like, oh, which kind, you know, which kind of sociocracy? We were like, wow, what just happened, you know? And that's actually really inspiring for us in Sociocracy for All, because what we wanted to do was put it on the map. And what is happening right now is not only is it on the map, but it's becoming like a standard way of doing things in some sectors, you know, very, very marginal still, but in those alternative spaces, it's like one of the obvious options. Let's see. So yeah, I guess one thing I want to say about sociocracy as a movement is that I'm a little torn about whether I call it a movement. In a way it is. On the other hand, a movement for what, right? Because sociocracy is used in so many different sectors. It's typically combined or in service of something else, right? Because that's what governance is. In service of community, or in service of self-directed learning, or in service of just shared power. in, for example, a nonprofit. So it's often or very often connected with something else that belongs into this movement of movement. Let's see, what did I not say? I guess just as a like 3-sentence version of what it is, it stands between, like, as a best of both worlds, between like very horizontal but somewhat structureless organizations and super hierarchical top down. And we take the clarity from the top down, and we take the egalitarian aspect from the horizontal organizing, and it's a really smart system where all those pieces click into place.
Check. That's a very nice way of putting this very living system that it's constantly in adaptation also, no, to be able to fulfill the expectations of the members for these communities or companies. And it takes a deep adaptation in order for us to recognize nature with its rights, for us to be giving a step ahead and living eco-villages, and to adopt such a governance model that, you know, like bring aspects of these horizontal and vertical levels, as Ted explained. So I would like to know now from Dim, what is a deep adaptation? Is it a movement? What is that all about, Dim?
Deep adaptation was officially started somewhere in the vicinity of late 2018 when British academic Professor Jem Bendell, who his study is in sustainability leadership. And so he'd been involved with corporations and NGOs and the UN and so on, trying to find ways to articulate what is leadership in a time when sustainability is so called for. And perhaps the shocking piece of his self-published paper was that he was saying, there is no sustainability going on. You know, he literally called the emperor having no clothes, and at the most daring level, daring meaning he was risking his career by naming what's so from his perspective. And so in addition to that rather bold statement in his original deep adaptation paper, which has been downloaded an extraordinary number of times, and you'll be able to, if you're interested about the history and so on, we will all be including informational links, and you can follow them there. So in addition to what he was saying about there is no sustainability in sustainability leadership, he was also quite bold in saying that we are in the midst of some amount of collapse around the world to different degrees now. And it looked again from his perspective in the paper that we are looking at many waves of collapse, societal collapse coming sometime soon. And that was the foundation of the boldness of his message. And he went on to suggest a few elements that if that is so, if what we're facing is collapse now, and there is no sustainability inherent in the system as it is, what shall we do? And he created something called the 4 R's, which is a way of people coming together and both asking themselves questions and asking each other questions in a way to come together for a deeper conversation about how can we approach this predicament, if you will. And so the 4 R's are resilience. You know, what do we most value that we want to keep and how? And relinquishment, what do we need to let go of? Restoration, what could we bring back to help us with these difficult times? And reconciliation, with what and whom shall we make peace as we awaken to our mutual mortality? And you can hear by the use of words like mortality what Jem is and the other people at the center of the Deep Adaptation Organization have been coming up with. What do we do together to be able to look into these deep conversations within ourselves and within the people we love and our communities. And so I'd say the centerpiece of what's offered in deep adaptation as a greater community is the ability to come together and to hold space for one another, to know that there's a safe place where I can come and start to feel the very difficult emotions that can be, well, really are built into the tough conversations of our world. And so that's the more or less the service. And I love, Ted, the way you said it about sociocracy. I'm really getting a sense that deep adaptation works best when it can be in service of something. I just really appreciated your speaking in that way. And I could see that being the way to imagine how deep adaptation fits in with things like now relatively popular term from France of collapsology, and really an important one that is fairly easy to understand, which is just with the precautionary principle, whether we actually believe that something's collapsing right now or we don't, there's this precautionary principle, like what if it is? And what if we've got some really tough things coming fairly soon? Is there a way we can be together that will invite the best of us forward?
Thanks, Dean. You mentioned a few times the word collapse. And for some of us permaculturers, the collapse was something inevitable. Though we were thinking it would come with the peak of the oil, the peak of petrol, it came like in a format of a virus. And we are now living this pandemic situation. I would give you the word back because I wanna find out from you, like, why do you think the deep adaptation and all the movements that are here represented, of course, are so important in these times of adaptation? And I want you to explore a little bit like the inner and the outer adaptation that we have to have in order to go through this crisis.
You know, I'm going to tell you a little tiny bit about how I wrote my own book, The Impossible Conversation, back in 2017. I had to ask myself the most simple questions I could in order to get my head around the extraordinary predicaments that we're facing. And so I'd ask questions like, how did we get here? How did we get to a place where we're literally in coffee table conversation, we can be talking about the 6th mass extinction, and it's human caused. And we talk about it like it's just another baseball score or football score or some average conversation. And so there's a time, this is a time when we really have to address, again, another very, very simple quote that inspires me to look differently quite often, is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. And so to avoid doing the same thing over and over, the only thing I can see to do is to come together in ways very similar to this. People who are themselves, each one, committed to finding new possibilities, to generating a new way of seeing or a new way of relating, a new economy, depending on what a person's emphasis is. And you bring enough of those people together and keep cracking open our ability to fully feel with one another, to be as present as possible in the face of extraordinary challenges and stressors. That appears to me to be the calling of these times. Anything less than that promises to be a very tightly held commitment to business as usual. I think we all have our own way of saying that, but it seems to me really obvious and consistent that the time for business as usual is over. And it takes extraordinary courage, and it takes extraordinary reaching out to one another with open hearts as best we can. I don't know if that was particularly the direction you were asking, but that's what showed up for me to respond with.
Yeah, thanks, Dean. It all takes commitment, as you said, no? Like deciding to apply it, whether in business or also in community. I want to give it back to Anna and just ask, like, what do people have to commit when they decide to leave big cities or this very unhealthy way of living and decide to live in eco-villages? Like, what do people have to commit in order to live these different reality?
Wow.
And how do they adapt? What's the adaptation?
Yeah, part of me just wants to say that they have to commit to like a way more connected, joyful, and meaningful existence, which is quite a nice thing to commit to. It doesn't feel to me like it's a commitment to, it's like a commitment to like following your love for the world and a willingness to do that together with other people and in collaboration with nature that we depend on for our survival. So for me, it's like a fundamentally beautiful and positive story that eco-villages can offer. That's there. So I know sometimes it comes out, you know, as people are afraid that, oh, this kind of big downshifting, we're going to lose our standard of living, and, you know, it's going to be horrible. We have to give up a lot of things. But like, for me, the kind of quality of life in terms of beauty and meaning and sense of, like, I don't know, almost like being a good human being on this earth. That's how I feel about it sometimes. For me, that's like at the essence of eco-villages and what people do. And I think, like, a bit, you know, to your other question about adaptation, I feel like I want to pick up on something that Dean said, which is about, like, it takes a lot of courage, right? And there is a lot of fear. And I think for me, one problem with somehow, I don't know if to call it modern society or like current kind of main systems, is that we become really isolated with our fear. Like, we become isolated with our fear, and somehow with the illusion that my survival depends on corporations or governments or like somebody giving me a job or, you know, this. And it's like an existential anxiety almost, and fear. And then how to meet like even more fear, you know, the fear of the pandemic, but also like then the fear of like total ecological and societal collapse, which is what we're looking at if we don't get our act together collectively. And like, somehow I feel like communities and eco-villages can show a way of living with fear in a different way. And part of it is what you're mentioning, Dean, like just the ability to like be with the questions and be with the emotions and find a way of like making them bridges towards connection, not towards like fragmentation or polarizations. That's like a super important thing. But I think also for me, because eco-villages then also bring in like all the other aspects of life, they actually can give a different security. It's like, I know maybe a little bit more like where my food comes from, my water source is like in my community. We have some kind of critical mass with which to withstand like the huge you know, impacts and kind of, you know, turns of global economy. Like I feel like a bit more collapse ready in a way. And that actually makes it easier to act. It makes it easier to not be so fearful, and it makes it easier to take a stand and to go out into the world and do more. So for me, like, we're not perfect, like by any like stretch of the imagination in eco-villages, but I think we're kind of working our way towards that, where we have kind of community safety nets, we have solidarity, we have some more kind of basic also social, emotional, as well as kind of material safety.
Thank you, Anna. And also I think to help people who are intended to live in eco-villages or people who are already living in eco-villages, the Global Ecovillage Network prepared like an impact assessment to help also people understand what are the needs to be changed, what are the needs that need to be fulfilled, and what are the changes that need to be made in order for, you know, them to get a little bit closer to respecting nature. And recently it was added in this impact assessment also the rights of nature, you know, like how much are we giving nature the voice within the eco-village movement? Do we consider the nature's perspective in a decision making, for example? So like how does that work? And now I want to give like the voice to Nati and Ted to talk about like decision making and who decides for nature, for example, Nati. So like what the movement has also to adapt to give nature a voice, and what's the decision making involved in this process.
So thank you, Henny. In spite that I think that nature talks through many ways and is talking to us at this time, unfortunately, she cannot go into a court. and defend herself. But that is the same thing that happens to my baby, for example. If something happens to him, I have to go to court and defend him because he might have a voice, but he will not be able to defend himself in front of a court. So the same thing happens with nature. As human beings, and especially like indigenous communities and people that are protecting the forest and are the guardians of nature, are definitely empowered to be that voice of nature and take the voice of nature into action and demand that nature is considered and demand the rights of nature. So definitely nature needs that voice. Of course, in countries like Ecuador, we are very lucky to have rights of nature recognized in our constitution. So I can actually, and I am doing that, go to court and talk on behalf of the frogs that are whose life is threatened because they might disappear with a mining project that is affecting their waterfall. So I'm doing that in court. I'm actually representing the frogs in court. But that doesn't happen all over the world. And I think that should happen. So, now, Henny, you're in a position of power where you can promote the recognition of the rights of a river, of an ecosystem. But that can happen in many ways. It can happen at a constitutional level. It can happen at a national level. Many cities in Mexico have been able to recognize rights of nature. We can happen at a local legislation or a national legislation, but it can also happen on just, of course, an eco-village, where I think there's a much easier and obvious relationship with nature, because as Anna was saying, even the fact and the idea that you understand where your food is coming from, and that you can see where your food is coming from, and that you can feel that connection, and that you can feel that you are that food that you planted yourself, changes things completely. So it's an even more interrelated relationship, where of course nature needs to have rights, where of course nature needs to be recognized as this living entity. And we need to pass this idea of only recognizing, human values and human rights, to recognize the rights of nature. And I think that eco-villages have a great opportunity of recognizing this, because you are community guardians for nature, and including this in your local legislation, in your governance structure, is very important. And I think that it can definitely contage, like many other eco-villages, to do the same thing, to recognize that by doing and recognizing that nature has rights, then you are supporting your own rights. And that whole proposal that eco-villages had to recognize the sacred spaces, because eco-villages are already these sacred spaces where, even though they haven't given all of them the name of the recognition rights of nature, that's a given. It's the same thing that happens with indigenous communities. They don't need to recognize that nature has rights. Actually, in Ecuador, it wasn't the rights of nature movement didn't start from indigenous people. It started from the people who had forgotten about rights of nature, because we needed to incorporate that into our constitution, because that wasn't happening in the cities. But of course, indigenous people consider that nature is their mother, and they treat it as their mother. And now they're saying, yes, of course, it's obvious that nature has rights. And we incorporate this into our legislation, into our governance structure, to even strengthen our cosmology and our relationship with nature and with these amazing sacred spaces that we've been creating. So yes, there's a great opportunity with eco-villages and rights of nature, and I'm really happy to be working in this synchronization between movements. Thank you, Henny.
Good. Yeah, I mean, we live in a society that for something to win, something else needs to lose. It's so sad, but it's also a reality that we are in this competitive world. So I want to ask Ted, how we can change and switch and adapt also to a mentality of a win-win situation, that we can win, nature can win, and all the parts can win. How Sociocracy can help, through maybe a simple proposal, how we can include rights of nature, the eco-village movement, with this deep adaptation mode into a more governance level, and make this part of our decision-making process. How do we create this win-win mentality within our society?
guess there's two things I want to say here. One is about just the nature of consent, right? Consent is balance, but not only balance between individuals, but also balance between whole groups, right? For example, circles between each other. And I guess one thing I want to pick, well, I want to pick on several things that people said, but the most recent, Henny, what you said about all the different parts, right? Because nature, of course, is a very important part. And the whole point for me is how we can see more of the whole, right? Because most of the issues come from only slicing it to whatever is convenient or whatever is right in front of us, right? And ignoring part of it. And it's about integrating more and more pieces to what we can pay attention to and what we can consider in our decision making. And that's, I guess, overall the frame that I hold for a system like Sociocracy, is that it attempts to hear as many aspects as possible with in the microcosm, like in rounds like we're doing right now, right? Of just like not just going down, let's say, a one-on-one discussion between me and Anna for something, you know, but really like always attempting of like, hold on, before we go down, can we go out again, and being like, okay, what's really going on here for all the voices in the room? So that's a ridiculously like small and easy and doable thing, but it's actually its impact is quite big because people don't zoom in so fast, ignoring so many things that are outside. Another piece of that is stakeholder representation, right? So for example, I know of people who in rounds, or especially in decision making, then give one person the role of, you know, 7 generation out, 7 generation back, like somebody holding that in a decision making process. That's, again, for me, along the lines of integrating as many voices as possible. I want to go back a few minutes in something, just the level of commitment. I guess I remember when I moved into this community 12 years ago, I remember when, well, it was actually quite sweet because we thought it would take us hours to move, you know, empty the truck and bring it all into a house that we had just gotten here. And then it was really literally a matter of 25 minutes, you know, because all these people showed up and everything was just carried away, like, you know, into the house. And I remember standing at our new kitchen counter then and thinking, like taking a deep breath and thinking, okay, I'm gonna, like, these are my people now, basically, you know, like that level of, like, that leap of faith of like, okay, now I'm gonna try to be in, you know, because these are the people that I can rely on. And that's shown up for me many times in this pandemic also, but just in general of, and I liked what you said, Anna, about knowing your water sources and all of that and having critical mass. And where all of that comes together to a system like governance, but many other systems as well, is that I notice is that both the community and our governance system and a few other pieces like conflict resolution, to me, help me, like, to quote you almost, Anna, help me be a better person, right? Help me remind myself of my values. For example, this evening, there's going to be a recycling party at the Kovasna where they go like through different parts of plastic and explain it to everybody and so on. So that's a great example of pooling resources, right? I wouldn't be able to pull that off on my own, right? But in a group of 80, there's energy to pull something like that off. So it holds me more accountable to my own values, not because I do that, but because we do that. And that collective energy is so helpful for me to live up to my own values.
That's beautiful, Ted. Would you like to say something? Someone open the mic? Cool. I want to pick like this collective. We are living very collectively at the moment, and the internet is something that approaches. We wouldn't be able to do this summit, for example, if it was not technology. So I want to know, like, from you guys, like what's the importance of technology and how we can use technology to connect us even more and to collect our movements. Because if we just take it apart, like the Ecovillage movement, Sociocracy, deep adaptation, and the rights of nature by themselves, they have such influence. But if we create a synergy between all these movements and create actually a movement of movements, a network of networks, we give voices to many things that we are talking about here. We cannot talk about living a healthy life if we don't respect nature. We cannot also agree with each other if we don't know how to communicate or how to take decisions together. And we cannot go like into these inner adaptations if we don't understand our emotions. So what's the usage of technology in this century, and how it can actually embrace a movement and create this network of networks? I want to start that now with Anna.
I feel like it's such a mixed blessing, technology, like also after a year of so many Zoom calls, and also knowing the ecological toll of like a lot of our tech, and especially also like our clean tech or new things. So one thing that really comes to mind, which is not answering your question, but it's really to question the tech we use, right? And how much we use it, and to see that it's not just existing in like a vacuum. It's also like an indicator of accumulation and kind of a product of the same exploitative systems that we kind of want to avoid. So setting that aside, I'm almost tempted to be like, I feel like it's really important that we each like do what we do really well and are dedicated and passionate about that, and that we then really back each other up when we need it. And we can do that with technology. We can like show up for each other in a way. But there's something about, maybe I'm thinking like movement of movements. It's like, it's almost important that like each element that's connecting is really clear in itself. I don't know if that makes sense. And there's like something about deepening what we do, like in our movements, in our organizations, and in our localities, and like with our ecosystem, with our communities, right? And from there we can connect. And I think that's where the power of connection comes in. But somehow it needs to be linked with this, like the kind of breadth of technology that technology allows us, for me, needs to be linked with like a depth that can only come from some other form of engagement with the world. And I guess for me, the real beauty comes when I feel like I'm not just connecting in some kind of like abstract space created by tech that's really virtual, but it's actually like I am speaking, like me as an embodied human being on Earth in this locality. I'm speaking to you, or like Natalia says, like I'm speaking like from the earth I'm sitting on to you, like through the internet, right? So I'm actually like a piece of the earth speaking to another piece of the earth somewhere else. And like then I start to get really excited about the potential that it has. So that's what comes to me to answer that. And then also, of course, I think we have an increasing amount of like platforms that are ethical and that are actually designed to make us collaborate rather than turn us into consumers. And I feel like it's really important that we use those instead of maybe the really convenient ones that have different ethics from us. Thanks.
Would someone wants to build on that? I see Natalia has the mic open.
Yes, I was thinking, and I always think when we work on movement building and this amazing opportunity of bringing all these great movements together, about that tale of the butterfly and the caterpillar. And I'm going to repeat it if not everybody knows it, but for me, it's key in the work that we do. And it's the idea that when the butterfly is a caterpillar, it's this being that is an over-consuming being that is eating and eating all the time. And what happens inside of the caterpillar is that there are these imaginal cells that come together. And if they're able to come together, they actually make the miracle of the butterfly and the transformation of the butterfly. And I think that is exactly what is happening right now in our system. We are in a planet, a big, great, huge, over-consuming caterpillar, and we're all disconnected. And if we can actually be those like imaginal cells, it doesn't mean that we need to convince everybody. We don't need to convince all the cells inside the caterpillar, but we need to convince and to connect with enough cells to make this network and this connection, to make the transformation that we're all looking for. So that comes to my attention when you're talking about technology, because I don't think that we ever realize, and now we have done so with the pandemic, the power of technology. So we always use technology with like the internet and for research and stuff like that. But for me, for example, in Ecuador, I was always having these meetings in Quito with like the organizations in Quito, and like I had to pay the transportation for people to come, and we never got together when we always had it really wasn't Zoom, it was Skype, or it was some other kind of way of communicating. And now all our meetings, we know we have meetings of like 70, 60 people when we always had meetings of like 10. And it's amazing how like in one day now we are connecting in different time zones from all over the world. And we didn't realize that, and we're not paying anything. Before we had to pay like all this amount of money to bring people together and use fossil fuels and just get together. And of course, I would love to go and hug you, Henny. You know, we're missing that is never going to be compensated. But I do feel that this connection and this push that we needed to connect the imaginal cells is definitely happening, and it should happen with the use and the adequate use of the internet and of technology. And I think that is what's happening right now. So I see it with a lot of hope.
Thank you, Nati. I want to pass it to Ted now, because I know like the Sociocracy leadership training is a program that happens online, and it's a platform that also connects. So how can we help in this case that Nati just mentioned? You know, like from before it would be like 10 people showing up in the meetings, and now it's 60 people. How to give voice to these 60 people if we are lacking to be, you know, like in a presential mode? How we can use technology in order to empower people to have their voices heard as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I feel just as torn about the whole tech piece because, for example, so my, the nonprofit, all my work has always been online from the beginning. So, you know, many years before COVID, I spent all my days on Zoom already. So for me, there was no big change. And one thing that I noticed, since you talk about SALT as a training program that is basically an immersion program, and all of our other trainings also on Zoom, that people give us the feedback that they felt much more connected than ever in a Zoom meeting. And I think the power of that is small groups and rounds. I always go back to that, you know, it's just, that's what it is for me. So we work a lot with breakouts and so on. And I guess sometimes I have this, I'm so torn about this, I guess, because I know, for example, my community, some people, you know, much older than me and so on, they don't understand how I can have such a strong sense of belonging and shared purpose with people that I've never met. So that's huge in terms of advantage of the internet. One thing that I struggle with, that's for me the movement piece, is yes, easy access, imaginal cells, connection, learning about each other, great, absolutely great. I love it. And it has really increased in the last year, right? Terrific. What I struggle with is that I guess I worry about overwhelm, and I worry about superficialness and having things in your head instead of lived experience, right? And I don't really care whether it's lived experience with people online. What I care about is that it's lived and actually real, and not just something that happens, you know, in your head. So that there's something out in the world, and I almost count, you know, like, I mean, this is world, you know what I mean? You know, it's just, it just happens to be transmitted virtually. So that's what is the current struggle, I think, is not the fact that you would have to drive somewhere, right? Because that's now easy. What's now the struggle is understanding each other. Like if I, for example, have the movement of, let's say, something that I'm trying to wrap my head around right now is the Montessori movement, okay? Very aligned with what we do. You can go, you know, decades and going deeper and deeper and deeper, like, okay, and there's like 15 movements like that I should understand, you know, so that we can, but how do you do that, you know? How do you reach that depth that I think Anna, or who was it, you know, was talking about? So that's that balance, I guess. It's almost that now our own minds are the limitation, right? Because the easy access is now there, but now, okay, how do you learn and connect and weave it together, both in relationships and conceptually? And that, I think, we're lagging behind quite a bit. That's why I love a panel like this, because that's what we need to do, right? Understand each other, where we're coming from, what we're struggling with, and comparing notes, and then giving people a chance to go turn something into lived experience, not just one piece, but also how the pieces fit together. That's what I'm interested in. How does it all click into place so that people can go use it and not just talk about it, the connections.
Dim, can we connect like truly with our emotions using technology for that, considering the time that we are living now?
Yeah, this has been extraordinary to listen to each of the panelists, to Anna, Natalia, Ted. Each of you spoke such an essential part of what I hold most dear in trying to face this world. And I'm going to speak outside of the deep adaptation role for a moment, because outside of the 4 R's that Jim Bendel put together, and that's fine. For me, the main R, if you will, is reconnection. I wrote a book again that in 2017 that was about well, I called it the impossible conversation, and because I just knew what we're looking at is just not possible to talk about given the state that the global culture is in. And so I started to ask again the most basic questions I could to in service of finding new possibilities. And each of you has spoken such an essential part of what I consider vitally important in weaving this fabric together that we're weaving. Yes is the short answer to your question, Henny. You know, can we share our emotions for one another? Can we hold space for one another to be able to have our hearts open at an extraordinary level, even in the face of a polarized, and here in the States, just literally insane world that we're in? Yes, we can, because I experience it every day, and I'm hearing each of you having your own version of that available. That each of your sharings is such an infusion, and in a different framing, using different words, but to me, it spoke to exactly the same kind of commitment. And my, again, oversimplified way of putting it is that we are each sharing our practices of reconnection. What got us into this global predicament is our business as usual way of demanding that we disconnect from all the core, uh, the primary sources of meaning in a human life. That could be deeper self, each other, earth, and soul. And in my work, I'm sorry, I've forgotten who said it, but there's this different ways in which we can invite that depth of connection, even through technology. And that, to me, is to invite each other to share our personal emphasis of practices of reconnection. So mine will be different than Ted's, and Ted's different than Anna, and different than Natalia, and so on. But when we come together knowing each of us has practices of reconnection that are very, very important to us, that directly address what matters most to us. And because we can share holding that little flame and then sharing it with each other, I think it was Ted who said something like, you know, it's those small gestures, it's those small moments that really can ripple out and be quite extraordinary in terms of having impact out through the circle that happens to be on screen at a given time, and then into our families and into our neighborhoods and communities and so on. So I guess the last thing I would say is I would loop back to how Anna started us out. And I also have a very ambivalent relationship with the use of technology. It is making these things possible, and I'm so deeply grateful. And I have, perhaps it was also said by Ted that I'm wary of anything less than a full felt sense of being an embodied human being, reaching out and connecting with another embodied human being in this moment, whatever the medium.
Thank you, Dim. Wow, I would be able to listen to you guys like for the whole day, but we are coming to an end now. But I just want to appreciate and say that, yes, we are all connected, not only to each other, but also connected to nature, and recognize us as nature gives us also the possibility to reconnect with our body, hearts, and souls. but it would be like a pity if we just like stop this recording and never talk to each other anymore. So like the way that the Global Ecovillage Network thought through carrying on with this conversation would be like through an online platform. And if we just look at the babies, the kids now, you know, this new generation, they are born interacting to each other through internet. So I think it's like just the balance that we need to understand, you know, like to help educating our kids also to be better fit in nature, but also to make a good use of these platforms. And one of them is hilo.com. So we're gonna put like all the links that you know, Dean was talking about earlier today, and any of you are more than welcome to put any links you would like to. And we're gonna this way also promote an interactivity to those who are listening and seeing this video right now, so that we'll be able to give them voices as well, so they can interact with us, and we are free to just like answer the questions or interact with our audience. So just like as a closing round, I'd like you, each of you, like to leave a message about this connection that happened here today, and seeing as ourselves and connecting with nature as well. And if nature had a new code, what this code to the earth would be today. Ted.
Hold on, give me a moment to think. So nature gives us a message, it gives us a code, and what is that code? Is that the question?
As a closing round, so
Yes,
just
I
like
understand
an
that.
inspiration for you to leave a message to us.
Well, I will go back to the virus. Yeah. I actually found it, I know that's a really twisted thought to have, okay? So bear with me. But I found it amazingly beautiful how much we were connected, you know, like this, like the idea of having like six levels, no, help me here, of separation, right?
Yes.
And we felt it, you know, like the shockwave going through the whole population, like when was it ever so palpable how we're all connected? So the sense of everything is connected in nature. I don't think that you can be anything separate. I heard that message loud and clear.
Thank you, Ted. Natalia?
Well, I was also going to go to the virus because I feel that nature, if we don't hear this nature speaking to us through this situation, then we're really deaf. So I think that's very empowering, and that's a very compelling message, and it's a message saying we really do need to do something, and we need to act now. Is urgent. I feel that this sense or this fear of like even our lives being threatened, everybody's lives being threatened, our parents' lives being threatened with the virus and everything, it reminds us how fragile and how insignificant we are to the earth, and that she can just wipe us out if we don't decide to change. So I really thank this space, Henny. I think that we can continue with this conversation and with this interaction and with this networking between movements. As I said, I feel that there's a lot to do with the eco-villages, you know, encouraging other communities to recognize the rights of nature, to incorporate the rights of nature into the eco-villages, and the whole network will be amazing. And we are here to do that and to support that. And to connect and to see what's the best option, and to have more dialogues, and to be and to invite you guys to be part of the hubs that we're creating all over the world, and so on. I bet that there are amazing people that are doing exactly the same work that we don't know. So I think it's an amazing opportunity to connect to each other. So my final message will be just of like happiness and of being very thankful to understand that you guys are very far from Ecuador, but we're all connected. And I love what Cormac says, and it says, when you guys feel that we're disconnected, just stand on the floor, on the earth, and what connects us is the earth.
Beautiful. Thank you, Nati. Anna?
I think what I come away with is a feeling of like, we need everybody, like we need everyone on board. Like we're more connected than ever. And with that connection comes kind of like what Ted said, like I don't have the capacity to hold that amount of relationship, connection, and knowledge. I need my circles and I need my circles to grow, right? So it's somehow like to hold the whole, we need everybody to come on board. So that's, I think, my call to action. And if Earth were to give a message through me, I think it would be really simple. It's something like, you are because I am, and we are here, so come home and play.
Thank you, Anna. Jean?
The message that I would want to relay is somehow similar to Anna, what you were just saying. We are because Earth is, and how that also wants to be said. That there's an organization, unfortunately, that wasn't present here, that is very present for me in other parts of my life, is Extinction Rebellion and other activist organizations that are so present these days. And their first demand, if you will, is to tell the truth. And there's something, I've stayed long time with that, just pondering. So what is it to tell the truth? And if Earth was relaying a message, a core message through me at this moment, and it was about telling the truth, what would that mean? And it's definitely an open question for me that I don't have any one answer for, but there's a purity, there's a beauty in it that seems easy to connect to all the little gems that I've experienced in each of the folks sharing in this panel today. So there's that message would be perhaps live the truth.
Thank you, Tim. And I think for me would be like regeneration. I think we use the word sustainability a lot, and there's nothing really that we can sustain right now in this whole complex world. So I think we have to regenerate our relationships, our ways of seeing nature. And I would add some more words to the theme of this summit, which is besides living, is also learning and sharing solutions for this regenerative world. So thanks a lot, every one of you that accepted to participate in this panel with us today. Let's continue our talk, let's continue our movements and connect to each other more and more. And see you guys now at hilo.com. Thank you. And thank you, Kiala, also for doing like all the background tech part. You played an awesome role here with us today. Thanks a lot.